3 Media.
This is the Book Publicist Podcast, powered by Local PR Toolkit. I'm your host, Jason Jones, and I'm a longtime book publicist and agent. We're going to talk to publicists, media, publishers, and authors and give you a peek behind the curtain into the world of book marketing and publicity. So, my marketing and publicity starved author friends, let's go! Welcome to another episode of the Book Publicist Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Jones, and I am here once again with the greatest producer in all the land, David Wilkinson, Esquire.
Preach. How's it going, buddy?
That's good, man. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. By the way, when we're done with this, there's an errand we should run together.
Yeah. Do tell.
Do you know about the
beer park?
The beer park. Sure. Let's say that out loud. Do you know about the beer park?
But I am most interested.
Well, basically, they're selling their cases at wholesale, so we can just drive up, pick up our beer, and
you said beer park. I was thinking maybe like water slides and stuff with like beer. I'm like, that would be really cool.
That's phase 2. But for now,
I'll settle for a case at wholesale.
When we're done here, that's an errand we can go.
Yeah, man.
Sweet.
Absolutely. So this is our third episode, and this is a show where we're going to talk to some really fun, smart people. Publicists, publishers, authors, media, in the hopes that our listeners, a lot of whom are authors, particularly of the independent and or self-published variety, can learn how to act as their own publicists and marketers, and they get a chance to see behind the scenes, behind the curtains, into what we do on this side of things. So today,
you're talking to a hotshot.
Yeah, man.
Jenaye White.
She's kind of a big deal.
Isn't she? She's a senior publicist?
At B&H Publishing Group, also known as Lifeway.
Yeah.
As those of us who've known Jenaye for some time call her Nene. Jenaye White.
Nene.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll trust you.
she'll never speak to me again. So I hope I enjoyed this conversation with her. Yeah, I bet Jenaye knows where the beer park is.
You think?
She is a party horse, dude.
I am on mute.
Yeah. No, she's not. She's a good girl. And this is a great conversation that we were fortunate enough to have with Jenaye at the recent National Religious Broadcasters Convention. All that to say, here's our conversation with Nene White. Everybody, I hope you enjoy it because my friendship with Jenaye is over. Enjoy. Hey, Jenaye.
Hi, Jason.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm great. You've been all over the world. I don't feel like I've seen you in forever. Every time I look
I know.
at Facebook or something, you're somewhere on the other side in some other hemisphere. What's going on?
We are both pretty busy people.
You must make a lot of money at B&H. What is going on over there?
Man, I just love to travel, and when I can take my vacation days and do something fun or work remote from somewhere, I like to. So
like Hawaii or Alaska?
That's right. I was in a wedding in Alaska this past January. It's these weddings that give me places. I was a bridesmaid in a wedding in Mexico, so I had to go.
I'm
that age.
You're a baby.
It's just happening.
You're just a small baby.
Oh my gosh.
So Jenaye White is an awesome publicist. She is the publicity person now over at B&H Lifeway.
Yeah.
And congratulations, by the way, on the new position.
Thank you. So now I'm doing a little bit more marketing, kind of doing a hybrid role of still overseeing publicity for our books, but taking on some marketing campaigns, which I'm excited about.
Yeah. So we met a few years ago. You were fresh, I believe, at that point, fresh out of Union University.
I was.
All of, you're bright and shiny and nothing
wide-eyed and not knowing what I was getting into.
Totally. And so you, very naively, right out of the gate there, you assumed that I knew what I was doing, and you leaned on me for something. We did some work together, and
I did.
I fooled you into thinking that I knew what I was doing, and here we are.
That's right.
So,
here we are.
So I'm going to tell you, I just told you off the air here a minute ago, and I'll state it again here for someone who might be listening to the podcast today for the first time. The podcast, the Book Publicist Podcast, is to help educate self-published authors, or any author really. They could be traditionally published and just not getting any support from their publisher, but mostly self-published authors who are who want to learn to be their own publicist. Most of the folks that I've talked to in my work the last few years have really felt like they've had two options, right? They either do no publicity at all because they don't know how, or they hand over 10 grand to a publicist, which they don't have. Most of them have just spent several thousand publishing their book, and they don't really have that left. So we want to teach them to do it themselves, and there will be other resources down the road. But for now, the podcast is a part of that. And so we want to teach them to think like a publicist, which means they should not only hear from me, but hear from other smart people like you who do what we do. So we want to give them a look behind the curtain. And that's what we're doing today. So let's talk for a second about what you do with an author. You get, if someone were to be their own publicist, they get a book in their hand. What's the first thing that they need to do before they approach media? In your mind, what's the first thing that you do before you approach media with a book that you're working on?
Well, the first thing I would probably do, as our marketing team does, so at a publishing house, we want to think about who the book is for, and that will determine where we go in the media, what opportunities that I pursue for exposure, for publicity for a book. That also determines and sets the course for the marketing campaign for the book. So figuring out who the author wrote the book for, and then for me as a publicist, I'm thinking through how can I reach those readers that could potentially pick up the book through the media. So what are they listening to? What kind of magazines do they read? What TV shows do they watch if we're pursuing media at that level? Or just what podcasts are they listening to or could be listening to where they could discover the work of this author and the expertise that they have and the new book. So really narrowing who the audience is. A lot of times authors want to think that they really wrote the book for anyone. And though that may be true in some circumstances, we know that we can get more narrow and focused so that we can really figure out how we can use publicity and my media relationships to make that connection for the reader and introduce them and expose them to new listeners and new readers.
Yeah,
so really thinking through the target audience first, I think is the first best step.
Yeah. Who is the target audience? Who is my ideal reader?
Right.
And what shows are they watching and listening to? What online outlets are they frequenting and podcasts are listening to? Okay.
Right.
So I think that's exactly right. And we're going to help them learn how to build out press materials and things like that. But as you do that on a daily basis, what have you figured out that might be some of the those best practices? And what do you include on your press kit when you build a press kit for an author? What's included there?
Well, we have all the standard information about the book. That's kind of the baseline. That's what's expected. But then I'm trying to think about, how can I help connect the book to something that the target audience is interested in, whether that be the end podcast listener or the producer that's making the decision about who to put on that podcast. So trying to think through what's the felt need that the book addresses, how can I connect that to something that people are the question that they're already asking, or what they're paying attention to in culture. Maybe if there's a news hook that connects. That's, to me, is the most important and pertinent information relevant to try to get publicity and show that there's something about the book that's newsworthy, right? So I'm trying to think not just about what the marketing angles are or just what the standard descriptions and all the basic information, but just trying to show how it could be a win-win for a show that might have that author on, how it can serve their audience, and not just be self-serving for us or for the author, but really show how it can be a service to what a media outlet is already caring about, or who the mom on the other side, like what her day looks like and how this kind of content will serve her.
Yeah, so more outwardly focused.
Yes, outwardly focused.
You help the media outlet win, and you win.
Exactly. We got to show how it's a win-win, because otherwise, sometimes I tell authors this in media training, otherwise I'm trying to figure out how to get free publicity, right? We have other people on the team that are looking for paid media, they're doing social media ads, and if what I'm pitching to a media, it just sounds like an ad, then they're going to send me to their ads department. But I'm trying to prove that they have an interest that overlaps with ours, and that they could take a chance and have the author on and give them free publicity instead of just an ad.
Totally, and I think you hit on an important point right there, and I have said this since the beginning of time, that your book is not the news.
Yeah.
They don't care that you've written a book.
Exactly.
What they want to know is, how does the information within this book benefit my audience?
Yes.
What is it that you have to say that is of benefit to my audience? Yes, you wrote a book and that credentials you.
Yes.
And yes, we'll mention the book. And if people want to hear more or read more, they'll go buy the book.
Exactly.
But we're not here to advertise your book. That's an ad.
That's right. I tell authors the same thing, because when we're looking at a press release, for example, I'm trying to figure out what the hook is, because I tell them it's not new news, or it's not that interesting that a publisher is putting out a book. Like, we're in the business of putting out books. If you're an author, that's your business. You're in the business of writing books. So that's not the newsworthy part. It might be, depending on who the person is, but we got to figure out what earns you the right to be able to speak into the media, and how do you get that? We kind of use that industry term of earned media instead of paid media. How can you earn a spot to speak to the media outlet's audience? And they might take a chance on you, and that might depend on kind of the relationship that someone like me or you, Jason, would have, the relational credibility that we carry. But at the end of the day, we got to think about who the audience is and how we can serve the media outlet with content.
So your job when you're building out a press kit is to help the producer or editor or writer, reporter, whoever it is, connect those dots.
Exactly.
You want to say to them, hey, look, here's my author. Here's why what they've written about is important to you and your audience.
Exactly.
And just to help them connect those dots.
Yes.
And include, what other information might you include on your standard kind of press kit?
I include sample interview questions, because that to me is that helps. One, I have authors fill out a Q&A, and I come up with questions, and I encourage them to think of the questions in an interview that they want to answer. Like, what questions would best draw out the content of the book, but also connect the dots for the listener and serve them really well. So I have them answer the Q&A, but those questions also serve the producer on the other side that only has 15 minutes to help the host prepare for an interview, and they don't have time to read the whole book. So that helps them prepare the interview, and it's like us writing it for them and saying, okay, well, if you are going to have this author on, here's how this interview could go. It's a service to them, but it also helps both parties think through the outline and how that interview can go really smoothly. So I include a Q&A/sample interview questions. They serve both purposes. And then I also will sometimes include statistics that tie into the content of the book and maybe help a producer think about how they could frame up the interview and the need, or why it's newsworthy or relevant to talk about this topic. So anything I can do, and any part of what's important, I think, as a publicist or as an author doing the work of a publicist for themselves, is just as much as you can learn about the role of a guest booker or a producer or a podcast host or whoever that person is, and how they have to think and what their work routine is like, because then if you can think like them, you can think about how to serve them best when we put together a press kit. And not just, the tip sheet that we would use in another way, or just the standard book description that we would use as a publishing house.
So you hit on something else really important there. You can't assume that the producer or host is going to read your book. In fact, most of the time they don't. 99% of the time they don't. They don't have time because they have a stack. I've seen them. They have stacks and stacks of books on their desk.
Yes, that they get daily. Yes. It can be frustrating when you see those photos or hear about that.
They don't have time to read your book. So you have to summarize for them, give them, a quick overview, but hit on the, what's most important and why it's important that their audience hear from you, and then go and want to follow you on social media and read your book. Now, this is something else that I talk about too, and maybe you tell your authors the same thing. The objective here, and as a publisher, I know the publisher's never going to say that the objective is not to sell books, because of course it is. But as an author, if you're listening to this podcast, I am telling you that the objective in doing media is to grow an audience of your own, to push people back to your social feeds, your blog, your podcast, so that you can grow and cultivate an audience of your own, hoping that someday you don't really need media anymore. You have a group of devoted, loyal readers. So you gotta to kind of get out of that mindset of, hey, I want to do a radio interview and sell some books. A radio interview is not going to sell a lot of books.
Exactly.
The idea is to co-opt some of that radio show's listeners and make them yours. If a TV newscast has 100,000 listeners, 4,000 of whom might be really interested in what you have to say, which is a very small percentage, but if you can take 4,000 of those folks and convert them to
that's huge.
To be followers of yours, readers, then absolutely.
And that'll lift up everything you do. Whatever you do next, if you're speaking, if you're, doing an email campaign with an opt-in buy, or whatever it is, it's going to lift up everything. And something you said that is important too, that I will remind, of course, from a publisher's perspective, or, we're interested in book sales, we want to see the book do well, but I'll tell authors and remind them that what I would see as a secondary purpose of the interview, and for them should be a primary purpose, is to build a good relationship with media outlets that will pay off over time. And if you do a great interview and it serves the audience really well, then they may not come back to me, or I may continue that relationship with the media outlet, but they'll probably have you back on as an author, and that could benefit you for whatever you do next. And so think about that relationship building is important for them in whatever they do next, in building their platform, but also maybe getting another invite and being able to talk about something else that they're doing. I think that's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. So what do you see being in the position you're in, being the kind of the next generation of media for authors? What are the hot new strategies and places for authors to try and place themselves? I mean, is podcast still what's next, right? I mean, we're a long way from
I know,
like that.
Even since we got connected a couple years ago, we've been talking about podcasts a lot and how they're growing and how they're this new medium. And I was at a conference this past year, and I was hearing statistics about how in our world sometimes we feel like maybe has podcasting already peaked? Has it hit the is everyone listening to podcasts now? But we've been in that world for a while. But the statistic I heard is that now 50% of the American population listens to podcasts. So that means we're only at half capacity. There's still 50% of the population that isn't listening to podcasts, so it's still a growing medium. We haven't peaked in people's interest or maxed out. So I think that it's still an area that's growing, and there's space left in the market for more. So that means there's space for other people to keep starting podcasts, to be talking to people through podcasts. So all that to say, I think I'm really interested in how podcasts can serve our marketing team and our authors, like whether that be through interviews, also through sponsorships. Those are new opportunities that are growing because of podcasts. And I think that the listener on the other end, and even if I think about myself as a listener first, I'm so much more invested. When I have my AirPods in, or if I'm listening to a podcast in the car, I'm a little bit more of an invested listener than how I might listen to radio when I'm driving. I still love radio and listen to my local independent music station, but I'm turning it off and on. I'm not quite as invested. But when I have my ears in, my AirPods, I'm really listening, and I've bought books from hearing someone do a long form 1-hour interview. So that doesn't mean I make a purchasing decision after every interview that I listen to, and we have to remember that too, that it takes maybe up to 10 touch points hearing about a product or something for them to make a buying decision. But I just know that podcasts have more of an invested relationship with the listener. And so I think that we're going to continue to see that be an important part of authors launching books or talking about whatever it is that they're doing.
Yeah. So a couple of things I heard you say right there that our listeners can take away would be that this is a marathon, right? Not a sprint.
Exactly.
This is something that's going to take a long while. Also, that you talked about podcasts and you mentioned your local media, and that's something that's important because a lot of people wanted to skip right over their local media and go do national media or do other stuff. Well, the thing is, and one of the things that our listeners are going to hear me say over and over again, and a lot of what our products and resources that we're going to be making available will focus on is local media. Because your local media, hometown is where you're most relevant, where you're most likely to get bookings, get some seasoning, get some experience, which is going to give you a better opportunity to pitch that regional show or that podcast or that national outlet. You got to start at home, and you got to get your feet wet there. So that is, as you search for commonalities with radio producers, TV producers, those folks, you may not have a lot in common with someone who's sitting in a studio in New York, but if you're in Toledo, Ohio, you both live there.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? You got a lot in common, and it's likely that you can strike up a conversation and cultivate a relationship there. So that's the idea, is conquer your hometown first. See that as a market that you want to own. You want to be the guy or the gal on this topic that you've written about. And let's start there, and then let's step out further. So all of that said, one of the things we really like to do for our listeners is just to give them a takeaway, a 1-minute takeaway from the authors and publicists and media that we're talking to. If you had a minute and you're talking to somebody who's getting started on their journey as an author who hopes to book media for themselves, what would you tell them?
I think just think about how you're going to serve your audience or serve the audience of the media. Of course, you're going to go in with your own goals, and you're going to have something that you're promoting, but the more that you can think about how to serve someone with your content and put yourself in their shoes or in their ears, I think that's that's going to pay off in the end, and that's going to really make an incredible interview. And then I would say practice. I think the point you made about local media gives you a great opportunity to practice doing media. The more you do, the more opportunities you'll get in the future. And I think there's not a lot of people that can just wing it. So practice in front of a mirror, time yourself, being able to talk about your book, and really work on your elevator pitch for your book, because you're going to get a lot of the same questions again and again if you're a new author or you have a book coming out. So, I mean, it's a cliche, but practice makes perfect. So that's what I would say.
Awesome. You're great, Jenaye. I love working with you. Always love working with you. Wish I could see you more, but
Yes.
you have to be in the hemisphere for that to happen. Let's do this again soon.
That
over
sounds
coffee.
great.
And
Over
we won't be
coffee.
mic'd up, but we can still have a great conversation.
That sounds great.
Okay, so listen, if you didn't hear anything else that Jenaye said, I hope you heard her say that what you're doing is not just an interview. It's about building a relationship that's going to pay off for you over and over again in the years ahead. You have to have a longer view on this thing than just your current project. You have to think about the long game. And remember that the media you're pitching, they are people. Sound bites and wisdom like what Jenaye gave you right there, that's invaluable. It's the kind of thing that we as publicists know and hear all the time, but it's not the kind of thing that you, our authors, friends, and listeners are necessarily privy to. And that's why we built Local PR Toolkit, a one-of-a-kind suite of tools and resources that train you up to be the publicist you've always wanted and needed. So find us online, localprtoolkit.com. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And until next time, remember, the search is over. The publicist is you.
The Book Publicist podcast is part of the Mana 3 Media Network. It is hosted by publicist Jason Jones and is produced and edited by me, David Wilkinson. You can rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. We'd love for you to subscribe to the Book Publicist podcast wherever podcasts are downloaded. And be sure to check out our episode show notes. Special thanks to Jenaye White for being on the podcast. Be sure to go to localprtoolkit.com to get started right now on becoming your own publicist. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and you can check out more podcasts by Mana 3 Media, including my own, Dad Matters, on Instagram at Mana 3 Media. That's MANA, the number 3 Media. New episodes of the Book Publicist podcast drop bi-weekly every other Wednesday, so join us again in 2 weeks.